I'm gonna ask that you indulge me for a moment. I want you to be mindful of the moment you are in right now. Like, really think about everything around you. You may be sitting down at your desk watching this video on your computer in the warmth and comfort of your house. If you're like me and can't fathom the idea of not watching something while eating, you've probably got a nice home-cooked meal in front of you, or a takeout from your favorite restaurant. You got some blankets over you, maybe even got a space heater by your legs. You truly could not be more comfortable. And when you look outside, you see all the different houses and buildings filled with people all going about their own daily rituals. Everything around you is so common and routine, you have never really stopped and appreciated it, have you? But what if one day it was all gone? Your screen, your food, your room, your whole house. This is the worst! And as you search around, you notice that it wasn't just your house that disappeared, but also everyone else's houses. And when I said all, I truly mean all, because it doesn't even stop there. The roads are gone. The trees are gone. Hell, even the grass is gone. Just an endless void of nothingness. I imagine for many of us that would already be terrifying. And if you're one of them, well, sucks to suck, because I'm going to take it even further. For as you gather yourself and get a better understanding of your surroundings, you feel the texture of the ground beneath your feet. It feels somewhat firm, but it still has a lot of give and softness to it, like rubber. Or maybe flesh. And it's uneven. Uncomfortably so, as your feet desperately try to balance you. But that's not what you're concerned about. An even greater sensation gets your attention. Whatever is under your foot is breathing. You look down to investigate, and you see you're standing on the semi-melted face of a corgi, happily panting in excitement of seeing you. You recoil in shock at the discovery and frantically look at the ground, seeing vast patches of skin, fur, and flesh. Spattered about it are the eyes, mouths, and noses and limbs of every dog breed you can think of. Welcome to your new reality. Welcome to the Dogscape. Let me give just a bit of personal history. It was my middle school years during the early to mid 2010s that my love for horror had truly solidified. And if I'm being completely honest, a huge part of that was just due to my ever-increasing fascination with the internet horror stories and culture that were becoming popular at the time. Yeah, everyone who was a kid from that time had played Slender and FNAF, or they watched their favorite YouTuber play it, or do a lore video, and for most of them, that was pretty much the extent of it. I, on the other hand, got way more into it and just went so much farther into the rabbit hole. I would religiously listen to Mr. Creepypasta while gaming or some other channel like that, or I would spend hours just reading SCP entries and no-sleep posts. And let me tell you, 11-year-old me was not ready for what he was reading. I mean, everyone also had seen like that one Jeff the Killer photo, and yeah, it looked scary, but we still all knew it was fake, even though we were kids. But bitch, one day I told my classmates about 1999, and 15 minutes later, I was sitting in the guidance counselor's office. Middle school in general was just the beginning of my obsession with that whole side of both horror and the internet. But at the same time too, that was also definitely my peak. After that, it sort of dwindled, but I still always find myself having bursts of just getting drawn back into it, listening to newer uploads from all those classic horror narrator channels, or just reading whatever had gotten popular since the last time I checked. And it was when I was having one of those phases in high school that I was introduced to the subject of today's video, the Dogscape. Okay, before we even touch the actual story, just the origin is interesting to me, and I think it's worth talking about. See, a lot of internet stories usually only have one writer. Even when you have all these different stories featuring popular characters like Slenderman, Jeff the Killer, or FNAF, these were all usually different people working independently from one another, and all these works were seen as like their own separate canon. Essentially, they almost never had any connection with each other. But with the Dogscape, while you still got all these separate authors crafting their own stories, they've all been collected and treated as one overarching narrative. The world of the Dogscape is really more of a framing device for all these small stories going on in that world. Which, to me, especially at the time I first read it, it was very reminiscent of one of my personal favorite books, Ray Bradbury's The Martian Chronicles. Yeah, the guy who wrote the book, Fahrenheit 451, that we all had to read for school, he had a collection of sci-fi short stories slowly detailing mankind's conquest and inhabitants of Mars. All the stories in here were originally separately released in magazines, and now they are all collected into a single overarching story that spans, like, literal decades. Actually, if I got any fellow Fallout fans with me, you may recognize one of the stories, There Will Come Soft Rain. In that short, an automated house continues to function after nuclear war wipes out the family, and there is a direct reference to it in Fallout 3. The 13-year-old me, this was just an awesome read. I just really enjoyed the book. And when 16-year-old me heard about Dogscape, which is like that but with body horror and gore, bro, you could bet your ass I was hyped. However, Dogscape is much more of a quick read and nowhere near as developed as The Martian Chronicles. The timeline of events is all over the place. We're talking about literally jumping through decades or even centuries between some stories. and there really isn't much in the way of actual characters. Every story more or less serves as a means to reinforce the horror and brutality that living in the Dogscape brings. Which, don't get me wrong, is still really cool. Based on my own memory of what I read and what I knew was popular, I can't think of too many other stories where not only was the threat on a global scale, but by the time the story had even started, the threat had already won and the world is completely doomed. Everything afterwards is just the aftermath, which to me is still very scary. And to prove that, we are going to be diving into these stories and analyzing the full scope of the horrors the Dogscape has to offer. For the sake of not dragging this out, there are times I'm going to be reading a couple of them before I give my commentary. I think that wraps up the long and pretentious intro, so without further ado, I present to you the Dogscape. I awaken. I don't know it at the moment, but this day marks my 4th straight year of existing in the Dogscape. I push myself up from the carpet of writhing, twitching dog flesh beneath me, and rise to my feet, stretching in the morning sun. It took me a while to learn to balance on the layer of solid dogs and now blanket every inch of solid ground, but nowadays, I can walk and run as easily and as fast as I ever did on soil or concrete. Perhaps faster. This was a city once, I think, though which one I can't remember. I only owe my guess to the massive pillars of dogs jutting into the sky, perhaps ancient buildings now completely filled and overgrown by canine biomatter. I climbed one once, sinking my fingers and toes deep into the dog wall to gain purchase, and after hours and hours of climbing, I was rewarded with an incredible vista. Fur and eyes, panting tongues and wagging tails, hugging the contours of the once barren land and stretching in a single amoebic mass farther than the eye can see. Now I don't do that though. Now I merely go about my day. I hike to the gardens, where the dog plants sprout up in bizarre shapes from the floor of the Dogscape, and reach up to pluck the fetal puppy fruits right off the wagging, energetic branches. I bite into the succulent flesh, the juices dribbling down my chin and dripping down to be reabsorbed by the ground flesh, and revel in the savory taste. I'm thirsty, so I range until I find one of the mother mounts, and there I suckle at a teat patch until I've had my fill of milk. Sometimes I see other humans around me, as well adapted to the Dogscape as I am, but I barely acknowledge them, say nothing. What, after all, is there to say? The world is different now. What meaning would our words have? Free-ranging dogs are becoming rarer and rarer to see now, and those I do see seem as lost, as passive as I am. They too graze on the dog plants, stepping carefully over the undulating, bleeding dog floor, dimly acknowledging myself and one another. In the distant sky and on the far horizon, I sometimes see massive forms sail or crawl or undulate, and I wonder if in this new world normal single ambulatory dogs have become as obsolete as I am. I dug down once, down beneath the dogs, beneath the hair and the ears and the barking. It was hard, and it took a lot of planning. I had to destroy one of the dog trees with my hands, rip out the twisted, yard-long communal spines that served them as branches, and lash them together with tendons and skin. But soon I had tools. Pitchforks, spears, shovels. I picked a spot where the dog floor seemed shallower and set to work. The blood started spurting when my spear first broke the surface, and didn't stop for hours and hours and hours. I was drenched in gore and viscera, covered in flecks of bone and meat and brain. But I learned to ignore the sickening squelching sounds, ward off the smell, and just kept going deeper and deeper, spearing and levering out dogs of stranger and stranger size and build. Dogs with 2 heads, dogs with human hands, dogs with writhing tentacles where their back legs should be. Eventually, I came to the end of the dogs, or perhaps the beginning of whatever lies beyond the dogs. An expanse of multicolored patchwork fur that extended as far as I could dig in any direction. I could pierce it with great difficulty, but it barely bled, and try as I might, I could only barely peel the skin away, revealing a layer of striated grayish muscle beneath. It started to tremble as I watched it, shaking the very dog matter around me, and I realized that the Dogscape was beginning to regenerate itself, and close in over me, seal me in. So I fled, climbing back up into the light. The stream trickled warmly past the black, leathery edges of the puppy mouth stream. The saliva waters churned as they flowed from the bed of the stream, lined with the everlapping tongues of eager, greeting puppies. To feel a rock on the shore is to find sharp milk teeth of weaned dogs, cast to the tufts of mangy weeds growing into spits and banks. The head of the stream is split by a single mound of golden fur, like an upholstered boulder set with a large golden eye that swerves to see passing visitors. The waters will bubble and froth should the eye see you. The tongues lap nervous, loving greetings with gurgled yips. So from these first few stories, we're given a description of what the Dogscape is and what living there is like. You got literally the entire landscape covered in dog bodies and faces, and if that wasn't already horrifying enough, all these dogs melted together are breathing and moving as if they're actually alive. The way that the first story describes the towers of flesh and biomatter covering what were once skyscrapers is such a cool visual. It drives the idea that all of this is just layered over the normal world, and that layer is so thick it's basically impossible to remove it. Log 2's narrator tried that, and not only did he just have no means of getting any deeper once he got to that layer of fur, but the Dogscape regenerates itself, so any progress you do make would just be immediately wasted. Jumping off of that, in that same log, when the narrator got to the fur and tried to breach it, it triggered like some sort of defense mechanism, like when any other creature feels threatened. To me, this alludes to the idea that the whole planet is just possibly a single unfathomably large creature, despite its surface being made up of billions of dogs. A potential hive mind, if you will. The idea that the whole planet is a single living creature is also maybe why some of the notes about the landscape describe these macabre emulations of nature. Like when whatever exactly the Dogscape is absorbed natural elements like trees and rivers, it learned what those things were conceptually and tried to shape parts of its own being to mirror them. And of course, the other biggest takeaway you got here is that you get to see how the people who are left have adapted to living in this hell, especially in log 1. The first line specifies that it's been 4 years since the world has become this way, so at this point, anyone who is still alive must have figured out how to survive in it. There apparently is food and water to be found, but you got to make peace with the fact that it's all directly from this fleshy, disgusting thing. Even I can't help but be somewhat grossed out by just trying to imagine what a puppy fruit is. Like, I am positive that juice is going to be blood or some other disgusting bodily fluid. Will say though, the mental image of just a dude face down on the ground suckling on a boob sticking out is kind of funny to me. Is all this gross and dehumanizing? Hell yeah, but regular plants and crops don't exist anymore, and any actual animals are rare. If you want food in the Dogscape, this is pretty much all you got. And easily my favorite part of this whole segment is the bit about how no one interacts with each other. Because as they said, what would be the point? The world as you know it, it's gone. There is no bringing it back or any hope of fighting the Dogscape. The narrator in log 2 made somewhat of an attempt, but I doubt he would have made any meaningful damage before you get consumed by the Dogscape's regenerating flesh. All the humans left have just collectively agreed that things will just never be the same, and truly the only thing you can hope for is staying alive. The Dogscape. That's what we call it. Us humans that banded together, I mean. We sit around campfires and cook the whelps we collect from the dog trees. The only flammable material we have is the acrid fur that grows everywhere. It offends all senses, but soon the meal is prepared. The only food sources are the dog trees and the mother mounds. Some foolish enough dig for meat. Though the reward is great, many don't come back, for the dog flesh regrows above them, trapping inside the moist ground. Primitive tools are forged from bones and leather, such as shovels and knives and clothes. I have lived here for as long as I can remember. There are faint shimmers of the time before the dog flesh, but what use is there dwelling on the past when it cannot fill our stomachs in the present? I am our tribe's scribe. My name is Doc. I used to have a real name, but it escapes my memory. I record all our findings and knowledge in my leathery pages, using dog blood as ink. There were times when there were more of us. The tribe started with as many as 60 people. Now, our numbers are as few as 20. Our leader is Keith. He instructs us to find food, build shelter, and bring fire. He abuses his power, taking 5 wives and eating more than his share of food, but those who speak against him meet death in the night. It is hellish, but there is no other choice. Without guidance, we will die here, so we must remain under his leadership. It has been 2 days since my last writing. I am lucky that Keith cannot read, for if he had seen my statements about him, I would be dead. Yesterday, one of our tribe members, Cod, was killed by accidentally stepping into one of the open dog mouths. His screams of pain as it chewed forced me to crush his skull with a shovel, killing him instantly. The bastard Keith claimed Cod's food ration as his own. I could sense the others are beginning to tire Keith's position of power as well. Nobody spoke a word at that night's feast. I will not sleep well tonight, hearing cat screams in my nightmares. I fear for my life. Feck was killed in front of all of us by Keith today. He refused to continue digging for meat, so the monster beat him to death with his bare hands as a sign that he would not tolerate a refusal to work. I cannot stand for this much longer. Feck was not even an adult. He could not have been more than 17 human years. This brings our numbers down to 18. There is Keith, his 5 wives, me, and the remaining 11 diggers and gatherers. The others whispered to me in secret that I should be the leader instead. I guess they think I have all the answers because I'm the scribe. Only time will tell. I was awoken at the crack of dawn by one of the diggers, Gare specifically. He told me that tonight would be the night. The others had a plan. They want me to announce that I am the new leader during the feast. When he is distracted with rage, they intend to kill him from behind. I tell Gare that I accept his plan, and will assist him tonight. But what have I gotten myself into? Damn them all! I told Keith I planned to replace him. He arose, filled with rage. I waited for the blow to strike him, but it never hit Keith. Instead, it hit me. Gare was Keith's spy all along. They dragged me far away from the gardens and tied me to a barren dog tree. He said that a quick death would not befit me, and I would waste away under the deathly sun. I could barely just reach my journal from here. I suppose it's the end of me. When the sun was highest in the sky, the heat became unbearable. I saw figures on the horizon. They were not human. They were the hounds that come to eat what the humans leave behind. I thought they were going to eat me. Instead, they went for the blood-soaked meat tropes that held me in place. I was free. I kneeled down to the hounds and looked deep into their eyes. I told them I knew where they could fill their bellies to the brim. They barked once in what I assumed was confirmation. I stood up, and we set off to feast. When we reached the settlement, it was amidst their feast. I approached, death in my gaze. Keith was shocked and angry. The diggers and gatherers were quick to his defense. I guess he bribed them. I whistled and the hounds slinked through the fur to my side. We struck like a lightning bolt. My fist smashed into Keith's face just as my hounds pounced upon to close his guards. Though I was physically weak, I was quite fast. I stole a shovel and quickly buried it into Keith's blow while he was disoriented. The smell was sickening, as I expected from a man like him. The hounds made quick work of the rest. I helped, of course. None were spared. I made sure I had my vengeance upon Gare. The hounds were quite full by the end. I took my time and buried each corpse, or what was left of them. I leave this book upon their graves in the hopes that someone who can understand it finds it. If you do, take heed of these words. The Dogscape knows all, and it is strict but fair. She provides justice, where justice is due. Log 4 was an especially interesting read. Where everything else before was just meant to introduce the world of the Dogscape, this was the first actual story within that world. This time we get actual characters and a plot, and the Dogscape is really just the framing device I talked about. We don't know when this story takes place in conjunction with the first ones, but at this point in time, the remaining humans have truly abandoned all sense of modern society, going back to very primitive, tribal, hunter-gatherer lifestyles. I felt it was an especially nice touch that they even went as far as to abandon their regular old names they had before. The fact that the author specifies he had a previous name confirms to me that these people were around for the initial destruction of the world. And now I have to speculate that maybe to not drown in despair that things will never go back to normal, cast them aside so they wouldn't serve as a reminder to times once before. Even just remembering your old name from your previous life is too much of a mental toll. Even though those elements were cool, I gotta say as a whole, I'm still not the biggest fan of the story. Don't get me wrong, the setup and the conflict are fine, but it's the resolution at the end that kind of killed it for me. I like the idea that the Dogscape is sentient and will interact with people when it wants to, but I feel you could have taken it so much further than what we got here. The way it played out was just some dogs freeing Doc and helping him kill his tribe was so anticlimactic to me. First of all, seriously, 17 people with tools and weapons couldn't beat one guy and a couple of dogs? It doesn't say that these dogs were special in any way. Personally, I'm picturing regular Dobermans. A group of nearly 20 people can fight that off, especially if they all have weapons. And I mean, you've got a planet-sized threat whose power and existence defies all sense of logic. Freaking use it! If it were up to me, I think it would have been cooler and more horrifying if the Dogscape just opened itself up under Doc's tribe and consumed them that way, or even just had tentacles jut out and smash them all. That to me is much more scary than just sending some wild dogs after you, because then you establish this constant looming threat that for whatever reason, the Dogscape can just decide it just wants you dead, and there is literally nothing you can do to stop it or fight back. I'm probably sounding too harsh though. It's not a bad story. It's still cool that we got our first actual narrative, and trust me, they do get better. I had a dog right after the Dogscape happened. His name was Carl, and he always followed me around. When I was almost dead from starvation, he got me dog fruits. When I was dying of thirst, he held milk in his mouth and got it to me. One day, his foot got stuck in a mouth and I couldn't get him out. So I watched while it swallowed him. A few years later, when I went back, Carl was right there, but he was stretched out. I went to pet him, except it wasn't him, and he bit me and wouldn't let go. I wonder if people can be part of the Dogscape too. I miss Carl. All is one in the new truth. The dog mother is vast beyond imagining, and requires many to be kept comfortable and clean. We chose and do not go unrewarded, however. In her vast wisdom, the matriarch gives all that we need. We sup from her vast teat, a hearty meal unlike any other. It invigorates and nourishes us custodians, and gives us more than we could ever have wished. The time soon approaches, though, to find new workers. The metamorphosis is already upon many of us, and soon we will join with the glory of the dog mount. We are so different from the others, as they shuffle about down among the foil groves. Many of us already have a thick coat, and old Lawrence has already begun to walk on all fours. Soon we shall shed our mortal selves, and be part of the dog mother. Our mother. First of all, log 5, very tragic. Pouring one out for our good boy Carl. Regular dogs are occasionally mentioned in the previous stories, but they're usually described to struggle living in this world just as much as humans, which is a bit surprising my first time reading through these, because it actually ties to another reason why I didn't care for Log 4 that much. See, that story alluded to the idea that Dogscape can somehow communicate or even control any free-ranging dogs, and that's how it helped the protagonist of that story. But with Log 1 and now 5 detailing it, that's apparently not the case. I genuinely expected going in that regular dogs would have some special or maybe even preferential treatment due to the Dogscape having some sense of familiarity with them, if that was possible. But no, it doesn't care. No matter if you're a dude or a dog, if the Dogscape just decides it wants you, it will take you. And with its decision to do that with our good boy here, we are also now introduced to a new fate that awaits you in this hellhole. Assimilation. You now become a part of this thing. And I'm theorizing that Carl and assumedly everything else that was absorbed doesn't die, because if the body can be absorbed, who's to say the mind can't also? And with Log 6, we see that some part of humanity has not only accepted that fate, but actually embraced it. Again, the timeline is rarely mentioned. We don't know exactly how long into the Dogscape we're in now, but we're at least at a time that all other religions have either been forgotten or forsaken. And really, could you not expect that to happen? If the world truly ended up like this, I'm sure you're going to be hard-pressed to find anyone who would have the balls to say that this is still all part of God's plan. And it makes total sense why people would see the Dogscape as their new godlike figure, because the only reason they are able to continue on living at all is because the Dogscape just wills it, or at least doesn't care enough to wipe everyone else out instantly. This world can kill you literally whenever it wants to, so to these worshippers, anything that just allows them to keep existing is because of its own supposed benevolence. I think we knew the war had been lost the day the general committed. The masses of flesh and fur just spread like waves across the cities. We found out that whatever it was drinking the oceans and eating anything it came across. Airstrikes, tanks, bombs, it only slowed it down. We were living on borrowed time. It was unstoppable. I don't think it was until later that we noticed all the dogs were gone. And then at night, the howling. It was just too much. The former soldier's face streamed with involuntary tears as he remembered the events. He sat there, wallowing in his own emotions, telling his story to a skeleton he found. My unit, completely wiped out. I saw those tentacles and those mouths. They tore them to shreds. I ran away, even when they called for help. It's all your fault! The dog tree shifted slightly. The many eyes growing around directed their gaze towards the psychopathic man. You ruined everything! You killed my friends, my family, goddamn everyone! He ran and stabbed one of the eyes with a bone fragment. A howling noise emerged and a nearby dog tree swatted him several yards. He broke a few ribs when he hit the ground. He coughed a bit of blood, but got back up and charged again. This time he ran towards one of the open mouths and kicked several of its teeth out. It bit his foot in response, costing him a toe or two. He was so full of adrenaline he was incapable of registering any kind of pain. He beat and tore and bit at the flesh with his bare hands until he was knee-deep in blood and gore. One of the tubes he tore spilled some sort of digestive fluid all over him. It burned, but he had to go on. He dug and dug with his bare hands until the ground started to close above him. He kept digging until he found them, the heart and brain. He laughed at his fortune in finding both of them so close to each other. He jammed his hands deep into the gray matter, disturbing the contents and slowly losing oxygen in his tunnel of meat. He gasped and clawed at the heart, tearing it out of place. He collapsed and blacked out. He awoke to many tentacles burying themselves in his body. One hit his spinal cord and fused with his brainstem. A flood of thought hit him all at once, as he suddenly became one with the Dogscape. More tentacles connected themselves to his vital organs as he became assimilated. He saw through every eye in the lands, and he felt every single nerve on the planet. The healing factor continued tearing him apart, but adding new pathways and connections. It wasn't long until he was entirely consumed. His memories faded, as his brain was reorganized into replacing the one he had destroyed. Oh my god, this one is so good. Okay, I have reason to believe that this is possibly one of, if not the first story to happen chronologically. Every narrator so far, for better or for worse, has accepted the Dogscape as the new world order and are only concerned with surviving in it. But clearly our newest protagonist here, the soldier, watched for himself the initial expansion of the Dogscape as it swallowed everything, including the ocean. By the way, think about that. Even the ocean is gone and replaced with this. And not a single modern weapon used to try to fight the Dogscape seemed to do any meaningful damage. This is why I keep saying it's not possible to fight it. Airstrikes, and I gotta assume even nukes did nothing. You think that a single person with, what, a spear made out of bones gonna change anything? It really is just accept this world or die. And unfortunately, Private PTSD here would come to learn that the hard way. He was fueled by such rage and hatred that nothing else mattered, even in his own life. All he wanted was just the satisfaction of somehow hurting the Dogscape. And for what it's worth, it seems he succeeded, but not for long. The fact that he found a heart and brain to me again reinforces the idea that this is a hive mind made up of billions of organisms, so even though it's incredibly minuscule, you probably are still permanently destroying one of the many, many vessels of that hive mind, and, well, it didn't seem to like that. We now have a first-hand account of what comes with being consumed by the Dogscape. You become cognitively aware of every sensation felt by every other organism that makes up the Dogscape. Imagine if you could feel every nerve, every feeling that every other person on this planet is going through, simultaneously. Every cut, every itch, every bruise, just like every unpleasant feeling that any person on this earth could be feeling right now, you are experiencing. In my opinion, full brain death would be more merciful. It's been 3 years and 2 weeks now since I met another human being. I know because I cut a small notch in my left leg for every day, one in my left arm for every week, and one in my right arm for every year. Admittedly, not the most effective way of keeping track of time, but when I started, I figured I'd be dead or this would be over before it really mattered. Like I said, I haven't met any other people for a while, but I figured I would write this anyway just in case, as a warning to others that might be out there. I ran into something terrible today. Well, the whole Dogscape is terrible, but I mean more terrible. I think even among the Dogscape, it's some kind of crazy abomination, since the feral dogs and the dogmouths didn't seem too fond of it either. And that screaming is not something I ever hope to hear again. But that's not the beginning. I'm sorry about this. The blood I'm using doesn't really come off the paper, and I can't waste any by throwing it away. And not even thinking about talking to another person for years has made me some sort of bad at thinking in a straight line. But I'll try. Let me just start over at the beginning. The day started normally. It was my weekly gathering day, so I left by my tent. By the way, I left the tent at the foot of the Pillars of Dogs in the direction of the setting sun if you want it, but you probably won't because the skin has probably gone bad by now. But when I got to the place where there should have been teats, there was just a bloody mess where someone had dug deep into the flesh of the Dogscape. I didn't really think much of it at first, just that I would need to go looking for a new source of milk. And then I saw it. I thought it was another person at first. If I had stopped to really look first, I wouldn't have any problems and I wouldn't be writing this right now. I started shouting to get its attention. And I did get its attention because it turned to me. And then I realized I had made a huge mistake. Thinking back, the really long arms and the twisted body probably should have been my first clue. But I didn't really see that anything was wrong until it turned towards me. And I saw that what I thought was a head was just a featureless lump of flesh. Its arms unfolded outwards, each arm spreading in 2 canine legs, and the human face on its chest opened its mouth and started screaming. I figured it was bad news then and made a mad dash for the nearest pillar of dogs, but it kept running after me and it just was so much faster. Somehow I managed to make it and I started scrambling to climb out of its reach. I didn't get very far before there was a sharp pain in my leg, and I looked down and I saw that it had bitten me with one of the many canine mouths along the arm things. I screamed as it pulled me down, but that didn't do much, and I probably would have died right then and there if it weren't for what happened next. Out of nowhere, a mouth I didn't even see when I started climbing the dog pillar bit down on it, and then one in the ground. And they started chewing at it, but that didn't really seem to hurt it, but it let me go all the same. I ran away as fast as I could, but I could hear that screaming long after I was out of sight. I didn't sleep that night. Just before nightfall, I felt like I had to make sure the Dogscape had killed it and went to the pillar, but I saw no trace of it. But the notebook I tore this paper from was there and I took that. So now here I am. I'm not going to stay around here any longer after I finish this. But finding this notebook made me think maybe there are other people, and if so, maybe I should warn them about things like this. So if you're reading this, good luck. Oh, also, I am moving in the direction of the rising sun. So if you can read this, you probably are another person. So, if you go that direction, maybe we can meet up and be a little bit better off than we were. Ticks are the only things that seem to like this place. They're everywhere. During the evenings, I could see massive clouds of the bastards flitting across the matted surface, making the flesh of the dogs quiver as they drink their fill. Sometimes candid legs of various sizes and deformity burst through the surface to scratch at them. It doesn't work. All the Dogscape gains are vast stretches of scar marks, which the fleas feed upon. Sometimes I rest on the side of a large outgrowth only to realize it's a monstrous tick. They latch onto one of the very deep arteries of the dog flesh and endlessly leech out the new world's lifeblood. I saw a man once. It was hot that day. I was making my way for a dog pillar and saw him in the distance. He wasn't moving, and as I approached, I saw why. He was covered in ticks. Not a single spot on him was clear. What little clothes remained on him were stretched over the There was no wind, so all you heard was the faint scuttling of their tiny legs scratching against their ludicrously swelled bodies. He must have heard me, because he opened his mouth and tried to say something. His voice was raspy, and his mouth was red, but he did manage to say one word. Itch. I am not going to lie here, Log 8 is one of the weaker stories for me. I get the idea of Log 8 introducing new monstrous creatures that roam the wasteland, but when I think more about it, I would argue it kind of breaks some established world building. If we were to continue with the hive mind theory and this monster is clearly something produced by the Dogscape, why would the dogs that make up the pillar and the ground be hostile to it? Is this creature a different set of hive minds working and thinking separately, like they somehow went rogue if that was possible? Even if that was the case and this is entirely a separate creature working independently, what exactly is it doing that would make it a target for the rest of the Dogscape over the protagonist? Because similarly to Log 4, the Dogscape itself does seem to directly intervene, but I'm having a hard time thinking of a motive for why it would even bother. This would be like if you as a person saw two ants fighting each other and for some reason you decided to help one of them. Even if you make the argument that the Dogscape wanted the human to consume for itself, what's stopping it from doing that literally whenever it wants? Honestly, this whole thing reads to me as just pure shock value with very little regard for eternal logic and pre-existing rules, which I should clarify, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. This isn't an established author trying to write a published work. This is just someone on the internet who was a fan of horror and was just trying to make a fun story. But I think it's just in general disappointing to me when I see an author tackle a previously established IP, but then make their own rules up just so they can get their specific ideas in, even though if it breaks pre-establishing lore, if that makes sense.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
I think we see that a lot in like mainstream media nowadays, and I don't know, sometimes I just get too bothered by that. But I shouldn't be so harsh in this case, because for all we know, everyone who wrote these stories were just starting out, and we're just using the Dogscape as maybe like an exercise to test out their ideas. However, I would argue that practicing this way is when you should attempt to think critically about how you can incorporate your own ideas into an already established world in a way that doesn't break the rules already set. Because to be honest, not doing so is when we're just getting into straight fanfiction territory. Log 9 is okay too, but again, it feels more like it was written for pure shock value with that visual of the dude being slowly pumped dry by millions of ticks. I will say though, it could play into the horror that I was describing in Log 7, where you become part of the hive mind and start to feel every sensation. So again, just imagine you were feeling billions, I mean literal billions of ticks all simultaneously sucking your blood and just causing good God, just like giant bug bites. Again, that sounds like actual hell to me. But hey, if one of my current 66 subscribers is a tick and you're watching this video, congratulations! This would probably be paradise for you. Now look, before we get into this next story, I really ought to give a viewer discretion warning. Yeah, with everything I've covered so far, you're probably wondering, oh come on man, at this point, how can things be any more gross or horrible? Well, let's say that Log 10 gets sexual. Yeah, look, I'm not going to mince words, there is some especially problematic stuff listed in this one, so if any of these subjects are too much for you, feel free to skip to this part of the video here. I'm not going to hold it against you, and please, anyone in the comments, let's try to be somewhat respectful. Today is the 5th day of the 12th month of the 654th year. Ours is the final generation. After us, the Dogscape will be all that is left, and all remaining men will either be absorbed into Mother Dog, or perish from this swiftly dying world. I have only a vague memory of my mother. Whether she was killed, stolen, or absorbed, I cannot say. Really, no one is quite sure what happened to the women. Slowly but surely, they disappeared, often vanishing in the night without any warning and leaving no trace. Women are the only thing of any value in this world anymore, and the primary purpose of the tribe is to protect the group's claim to a woman, who was used for the benefit of all the members. Our tribe's woman was taken several months ago. The first month we mourned her. She may have been a captive in many ways, but many of us could not help but become attached to her. The second, some of the men began engaging in homosexual activities with one another out of desperation. I'm sure that I was not the only one who realized that there was very little meaning to our continued companionship, and that soon the tribe would disband. This is the 3rd month since she was taken, and it's all falling apart. First, the elder was killed over a dispute. It was really just a confirmation that the unity of the tribe no longer existed, no longer had any reason to exist without the tribe's woman, and so we began to drift apart. I know what will come next. When tribes dissipate, the members, alone and confused, come to depend on the mother dog for sex in much the same way that they do for food, warmth, and shelter. Mother dog's sex organs dot the landscape like disease-watering molehills and dog flesh. The men find a sex organ to claim for their own and spend their days thrusting into it. Often they find entrances near dog trees, when they're desirous, and eating the fetuses when they're hungry. They have no reason ever to move from their mound. In this way, men forget the world around them and become obsessed with Mother Dog. Now not only a mother, but a lover too. It is their everything. It is common to see skeletons, either bare or being picked apart by dogs, their pelvises still pressing into a dog mound, surrounded by the still reeking stench of their own filth. Today is the 27th day of the 12th month of the 654th year. As I had predicted, the former members of my tribe have slowly but surely fallen into a degenerate lives as mound humpers. The desperate scum have forgotten their own humanity. Sickening. I vowed never to fall into that disgusting state, and so I will walk this lonely, depraved dogscape searching. It can't end this way, with all humanity uselessly masturbating itself into extinction. So I continue, knowing I may end up hopeless, utterly defeated by the dogscape. Today is the 2nd day of the 4th month of the 663rd year. I found a woman, standing, as if waiting for me, under a dog tree, her mouth dyed red with the blood from the dog fetus. At one time, I would have been puzzled to see a woman standing alone and unafraid, but I haven't come upon a tribe in years, and incredibly rarely does one come across a man who is not mesmerized by a dog mound. I suppose this must have been the biggest surprise to her, to have found a man who has not yet become a slave to Mother Dog. In any case, it's important not to take chances. So I grabbed her, forced her down, and f***ed her right there. Then I tied her down to the dog tree with a length of dog flesh rope that she couldn't run. Today is the 7th day of the 8th month of the 663rd year. My woman is pregnant. I have watched over her, protected her from the wild mongrels that still roam the dogscape. When the swarms of ticks came, I covered her in a hide. I wonder if we are the only ones left on this planet who are still human. Today is the 5th day of the 1st month of the 664th year. My child was born today. My woman squeezed my hand, breathing hard, pushing. After some time, the child came. A healthy, normal female infant. I saw that my struggles hadn't been in vain, that our race did have a future, and I realized I was crying. I held the child briefly, and then set it down to reach for my blade to cut the umbilical cord. No sooner had I set the girl down than a furry tendril shot out from the dog tree. With a whack, it wrapped quickly around the umbilical cord, gripped it tight. As the dog tree sunk into the ground before me, I hacked at the vine, but it could not be cut. Next, I went for the umbilical cord, tearing with all my strength to save my girl. But the vine had melded with it and converted it into the same strong substance. And so I could only watch in horror as the dog tree disappeared into mother dog, dragging my woman and daughter with it. I dug after them, ripped the dog flesh open enough to watch as the mutated dogs of the upper layers tore at the child's face. There is no hope for the human race. The Dogscape will not tolerate disloyalty any longer. And so, I commit myself to this dog mound, to become truly one with mother dog. What a damn fool I was forever thinking I could beat this world. Before I say anything else, I should reiterate that sexual degeneracy and assault are some of the most sensitive elements you can incorporate into your story. While I'm personally not entirely against it being portrayed in art and media, I feel authors at least owe it to make sure that it has a strong thematic tie-in that truly elevates the story. And even then, they still ought to tread lightly when covering it. And in this case, dare I say, I think the author actually succeeded. In my opinion, the degeneracy described here makes sense from a story's perspective and actually does elevate the themes of the story. The Dogscape is now fed up with humanity and is now bringing about its extinction, and it is doing it in a way that is darkly poetic, surprisingly. It could so easily just wipe out everyone that's left in one shot, but the fact that it's seemingly said about mentally torturing the men alludes to some malicious intent on the Dogscape's part. Sex is not only one of the essentials for a species' survival, it's also one of the very few pleasures a person can possibly still have in this world. So when you take both away by just removing all the women, the men that are left are not only deprived of one of their very few enjoyments, but now must live with the knowledge that their species will die with them, and nothing they could possibly do can change that. At that point, why try to continue retaining any modesty? And while I'm in no way defending the narrator's actions, from his point of view, he did what he did partially out of some sense of duty to potentially save the human race. And well, the Dogscape clearly didn't care for that insubordination. The way it literally just grabbed the mother and daughter and swallowed them was exactly what I would have wanted to see in Log 4. Just some kind of attack that you can't possibly counter in any way. The narrator for the entire story fought to change fate, but after witnessing firsthand the Dogscape's godlike power, he, like everyone else, has completely submitted himself to it, both physically and mentally. This honestly has to be my favorite story. Also, by the way, Log 12 also deals with sexual content as well, so here's another warning as well as a time code if you want to skip that part when you get to it. Again, no shame whatsoever. Galactic Calendar, Year 100, Day 1. We have arrived at the closest star system from our previous home. Our world was ravaged by war and we continue through space as nomads. We have searched for a hospitable world and find this one to be to our liking. We have received signals from this planet that date back at least 700 of its rotations around their star. If they are anything like us, then generations surely have changed here. As we approach, I am puzzled, for this planet appears much different from our records indicate. The planet is a brown color, not blue, and appears to be alive in its own right. We will send a team down and investigate. Our ship reached orbit around the planet's singular moon. There we gave the crew a final review of the information we know about the people of this world. Our main source of communication we have received was in the form of signals they called television. Our understanding of the language will no doubt appear primitive to the dwellers below. Though, personally, I feel something is odd. We had lost all communications from this world recently. The captain assumes it was because of their switching to a higher technology. They always talked about their newest technology, which looked more and more like a race that could enter that of other spacefaring peoples. I'm to go down with the rest of the team by the next day on the planet. Though, I watch the now brown world and feel that something is wrong. Terribly wrong. don't know how many days it's been since I saw the last human. It's hard for the remaining survivors of the Dogscape. Women have all gone and only a handful of men remain. But as I said, it's been days since I've seen the last one. I wandered the furry fields looking for a teak patch when I stumbled across something both horrifying yet wonderful at the same time. I looked down at what appeared to be a patch of both male and female reproductive dog organs. I stared, fascinated as they endlessly paired with each other. I knew I should have looked away, but I just couldn't. After a while of watching them breed endlessly, they seemed to stop. It appeared they finally sensed me. I almost felt bad for interrupting, so I started to walk away. But I felt something grab a hold of my leg. I looked down to see a mutated dog paw holding tightly to my pant leg. I tried to pull my leg from its grasp, but it held on. Then, to my horror, it started pulling me to the middle of the organ patch. I frantically began to fight to get loose, for I knew what it wanted. More dog paws spouted up and began pulling me. I knew I didn't stand a chance. I knew that I would be joined with Mother Dog in the end, so I silently accepted my fate. At least I would die happy.
And where we previously had our strongest story, now we got two of, dare I say, the weakest ones. Okay, log 11, you jumped the shark. You went too far. We now have f***ing aliens. And not only did you bring aliens into this, but you barely did anything with them. I would say if you're gonna go this way, you should at least take it further. Give us an even more descriptive and scarier visual of the Dogscape from an orbital view. Maybe some section of it actually forms into just one giant dog face sticking out. Just something more than, oh, it's brown. That's so lame. And by the way, we never see these aliens again. They're not mentioned or referenced at all in any later stories. There could have been some genuinely interesting stuff if we got to see the aliens go down and react to the full scope of the Dogscape. Maybe they even come across a human and they're just basically feral, not at all like what they initially believed humans to be. And just as they try to get back on their ship and leave, the Dogscape makes its move and destroys their ship or something, and now you got this team of people stranded in this new world completely unprepared. It legit took me only 3 minutes to think up that idea. If you're gonna use such an out-of-pocket, element like aliens, you might as well go all the way with it. I honestly don't have too many good things to say about Log 12 either. It follows the same formula as a bunch of previous stories. Guy's all alone, hasn't come across anyone else in a while, sees something scary, the end. And it doesn't help that its handling of its sexual content was not as well done as in 10. Where in 10, that served a genuine thematic purpose. Here, it's used more for straight shock value. The mental image of a million dog just constantly I don't know, I didn't really need that at that moment. And that stupid attempt at a joke at the end with, at least I'll die happy. Who would actually... You know what, I've been online long enough to know that there are some actual freaks out there who would be into it. But still. But there is one new idea I could take from it, and that this is possibly how the Dogscape regenerates itself and adds to its hive mind. If its different parts are actually somehow breeding, and it's not the Dogscape's weird way of masturbating, you could make the argument that this is how new masses of flesh are able to refill destroyed gaps in its structure. It's actually birthing it.
While archaic, tribal worship of the Dog Mother in all its visible and fleshy glory is the most common form of religion in the barbaric Dogscape. There does exist another mythology, though. One practiced only in distant, isolated pockets, and by a few of the older survivors. The exact details change from tribe to tribe, year to year. The basics never change. It is the legend of the beginning of the Dogscape, the genesis of the world that we know. It tells of a time when humans were plentiful and walked upon ground that wasn't alive. There is a god, or demon perhaps. A dog that lived amongst the humans was even accepted and provided for by a human family. But it was no ordinary dog. This beast lived for over 50 years, while canines at the time rarely lasted more than a decade. It was greatly powerful, more in control of its owner's family than they were of it. They say it went out at night and hunted human prey, bringing back large collections of bones as trophies to its home. But the humans tried to ignore it, convinced themselves that it wasn't a problem. Soon, though, as the origin dog reached a century of age, it became increasingly powerful and unlike others. There were more strange disappearances and even attacks during the day. Vehicles were found with deep bite marks through metal, and homes were burrowed into from below. The government of the time, many times more powerful than any chieftain of today, captured the Hellhound. They performed experiments trying to understand what it channeled its energy from. Progress was good. It looked as though even the secret of immortality could even be gained from this dog.
But accidents occur. The betrayer, as they call her, who worked at the government facility, felt sympathy for the god dog. She released him, and concurrently, the all-consuming hell that is the Dogscape. The arranged beast no longer held any sympathy for humanity, as it thrashed recklessly throughout the lab, mutated samples adhered to its flesh, growing like a cancer. Soon what will become the Dogscape was spreading like wildfire, its maw gnashing at everything that moved, its hide spreading over soil, stone, and sea. What is the name of this horrible demon? It varies, but they all come from a similar etymological origin, I believe. I've taken down names from all over the world. Armad, Mayarn, Aduk. And yet, the dog mother is most certainly feminine. Well, it is said that the betrayer was in fact the first human assimilated into the Dogscape.
We are so very close to the end, and now we finally get to go deeper into the origin of the Dogscape, the insatiable and unstoppable force that literally consumed all other life. And I think it's just okay. Now, look, creative writing can be difficult, despite what my dad says. It entirely being a government experiment gone wrong would have been too easy, so I'm really glad it wasn't that. The god dog that everything originated from was described as already being some freak of nature. Didn't age, had insane size and strength, characteristics that already defy all sense of logic and would leave one still speculating. Like, is this thing actually from hell, or some Lovecraftian monster that just surfaced one day? Or if we go the scientific route, was it really just the most extreme example of genetic mutation? Having that room for speculation for your reader to theorize is one of the things that makes reading stories like this fun. And again, as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, it's what started me on my journey into this fandom. I was, for whatever reason, obsessed with learning the lore and origins like Slender or Laughing Jack or even FNAF before there were 20 f***ing games and books about it. This part of the process genuinely brings me some nostalgia. But what keeps it just being okay is that I can easily see this not being the most satisfying explanation. Like the story of Dog Zero, as I'm going to call it, wasn't actually its origin story. Imagine if somehow you had never heard of Spider-Man's origin story before, and the only thing you're given is the part where Uncle Ben dies. Okay, yeah, that's not the full picture. Clearly some other important stuff happened before. The ending line, in my opinion, does a better job of having enough open-endedness to make fan theories fun. For if we are to assume that Dog Zero was male, but the first human it absorbed was female, and we operate under our theory from the weird self-orgy the Dogscape was doing in Log 12, we may have found what allowed the Dogscape to initially begin expanding. But that's just a theory. A f***ed up theory. Still got one more story, so don't worry, you're gonna be free soon.
It's cold here. Jets of moist breath dot the landscape amid undulating hills. There are no proper dog trees, only short piles of huddling dog limbs. Teats are few and far between, and when I find one, I must work to coax the milk into a skin bladder. I move across the hills, my feet numb through the shoes I have fashioned. I move in the direction that seems easiest, a subtle and mangy slope that I only just noticed was guiding my path in a general downhill fashion. Where there is fur, it is thick and rancid with matted oil. I don't know why the mother does what it does, but all of her fruits have their uses. I hack at a fur clump, separating it from the flesh below. There's only a little blood from a gray skin tag. I fold and shape the waxy fur onto the insulating hairy coverings on my body. The dog flesh rumbles beneath me in a more than disconcerting way. It has been doing that for the past several weeks, more so the further I have traveled. It is getting colder. I can hear only the wind now, tearing across the mother. The howls, warbling and mournful, have stopped. The sharp barks and yips no longer form a background cacophony. I huddle into my coverings and shoulder ahead. I have no path to follow but forward. The ground feels harder here. The gentle give of the dogland has ceased, giving way to a dull, sound-absorbing thud of matted fur. I slipped yesterday on what seemed to be a lake of solid piss. It was not reabsorbing into the mother. My own shivering seemed to syncopate with the occasional rumbles of the mother. Her flesh no longer seems like a living being, but I know that deep within her the blood flows. It is cold here. I continue forward every day. The ground slopes more and I struggle to sleep in a forgiving skinfold. There is no purpose but to move forward now, one foot in front of the other. It has been dark for as long as I can remember. How long will this night last? The air is dry. The land is mostly featureless and hard as I walk. The wind blows clumps of brittle hair across my face and they hurt. A soft pop, a subtle blue flash, and then they blow past me. My hands are deep within my coverings. They are numb, and if I expose them to ward off the shocks, then the cold will take them from me. I have already lost 3 toes. I can no longer feel that foot. I no longer bother to light fires in the deep crooks where I sleep. But the last I saw of that foot, it was black and swollen. It felt like it was burning. My travel is slow. I've heard soft, subtle tapping sounds, but when I investigate, I find only dog claws moving against the ground. The rumbles have continued, and with them now come subtle rending sounds, like a mouth chewing on a bone. When the sound intensifies, I move faster. I don't know what causes them, but I do not think it is the mother. I have not found any teats in a long time. I am thirsty, and my skin bladder is almost empty. I would kill my own parents for a fresh puppy fetus. I passed a small pile of humans almost buried in billowing dry fur. They were dead and desiccated. They looked like they were strong when they lived. I keep moving. There is only the road ahead of me. I do not know what it leads to. The ground shifted beneath my feet, and I pissed in fear. Not a mouth, but a great hard chasm of flesh and bone had torn open beneath me. A stinking, humid burst of air bellowed out, and then hung in a cold cloud around me. On my ass, I peered into the gloomy hole that nearly swallowed me, but it was now still. I sat and contemplated it, breathing heavily, and thought of my empty skin bladders. Slowly, I could hear sounds several feet below me start to play and echo in the cleft. A soft slapping, then a gurgle. I don't know how, but I knew that this was my chance for sustenance. I slid into the meaty maw. I climbed down a shorn slab of giant ribs, still red and moist, and finally landed on the steaming dark floor of the hole. It writhed beneath my feet. I felt around, not knowing what I was looking for, when my hands fell upon a thumping tube set into the meat wall. An artery. I grabbed it, pulling at connective flesh, and then bit at it. The blood shot into spurts, and I drank my fill. I was covered in viscera. I struggled to fill my skin bladders. The cleft shuddered around me, and I knew I must leave immediately. The walls were starting to hang tendrils of meat, feelers, to heal this damaged canyon. I exhausted myself climbing out and nearly fell back in as I crested the edge of the crack out into this cold night. The dog flesh slowly mended behind me as I panted on the hard ground. Before I left it, I considered it and catalogued it. A stretch mark. The mother was still growing. I am so weak and it is so cold. My filled bladders of blood are gone, and the gray dogscape stretches before me. I must make it to my goal, but I do not know what my goal is. I have walked for what seems like months in the darkness. I climbed down a huge mass of frigid dog flesh. It is like a great heap of small dogs, a pile of dog heads and legs, a mound of tails and torsos. It is cold and lifeless. A slow, low creaking can be heard deep within it. I grip an ear and lower myself to the bottom of the wall of dog, and my foot landed on something else. I gasp, then I get caught into a fit of coughing. I don't know what I am standing on, but it is not the mother. I feel queasy, nauseous. What could possibly be not the mother? It's frigid and hard, but I scrape at it, and bits of dandery coldness come up off of it. I hold them close to my face, and my breath turns the stuff into water. I try to eat a handful, but it is so cold that it robs me of almost all my remaining energy. The moisture trickles down my throat. It is good. I look behind me at the dog wall with exposed, frozen bones and happy-looking faces, then ahead of me at the featureless dark. I am too far gone to turn back now. I continue walking for hours, then sleep, then walk more. My footsteps are leaden. Finally, ahead of me, I see a light. I make my way towards it slowly over the course of several hours. It is a beacon to me now, a bright, glowing, steady fire. As I approach, I see the guiding light stands on a pole before a series of low, dark structures. They are like solid walls of bone, but not. They are not of dog flesh. The billowing hair and cold, dandery white pile against the sides. I know that this is what I was destined for. At one end, near the light, is a dark panel set into the wall. On it are markings placed there by some person's hand, but I do not know what they say. AIS-1 and entrance. I shoulder against the panel, but it barely shudders. I try again and again. I am renewed with new purpose by the discovery of this place, but I am weak from my travel. I lean my back to the panel and slide it down, exhausted. My back catches against a low bar set into the panel, pushes it down, and then clicks. The panel gives way and I fall into the darkness within. I am in a small, dark, dry cave. It is alien to me. The wind blows debris and fur into the room with me. I look around.
Strange dark masses seem to leer at me. There are soft white skins hanging on the wall, and more of the unusual markings everywhere. Procedure list, and keep closed, and warning, and wear radio at all times. A bright red cylinder of yellow stripes is inside a small box. I reach for it, but my hands scramble against a clear covering across the entrance to the box. I look at my hands now. They are purple, and I cannot feel them anymore. Another panel is on the opposite wall, like the one I had opened. I move towards it feebly. I am so cold, I pull on the handle set into the panel, but it does not move. A small red light flashes above it. I pull harder, but it does not move. I pull again, jumping, but lose my balance and I lurch to the ground. I smack my head with a dull thud. The cold is blowing in fiercely from the opening behind me. I scrape against the hard panel, but it will not move. More markings adorn it. Close outer door first. I do not understand them. I sit against the panel. My vision is blurry and a trickle of my own blood seeps across my eye. I go to sleep there, leaning against the dark doorway. I sleep and do not wake up. My name is Charles Montel of Arctic Station 1. The abomination is not here. It is too cold. Tigger and I are the last survivors. We are 14 nautical miles south of the North Pole, directly north of Vancouver. Triangulate our position based on this radio signal. This message will repeat in 5 minutes. The radio broadcast the message again, as it had thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of times. A cold, dead, desiccated body sat huddled before the radio system in a chair. At its feet lay the curled, dead body of a mutt.
Dude, what a way to go out on! Okay, so it's obvious that the protagonist of Log 14 somehow made his way to Antarctica. As we've been told in Log 7, the Dogscape covered the entire ocean, so hypothetically, there really shouldn't be any reason why a person couldn't walk to where Antarctica is. The descriptions about the journey, though, are so well written. Again, we are at a time where any people left have only known the Dogscape, so it makes sense that the protagonist would have no concept of things like ice or buildings. I'm wondering though, since he can't decipher written text but is still narrating a story, if at this point humans have even forgotten just English and other modern languages and now are essentially cavemen again. And this character is someone who, like some of the others in previous stories, has grown up entirely in the Dogscape. So when he finds possibly the only spot left on Earth not covered, it's as foreign and ominous to him as the world of the Dogscape is to us, the readers. And while there is no payoff, the door never gets open, I would say that in this case, it still adds to the horror of the Dogscape. Even if there was something in there that would potentially give humanity answers or even a way to destroy the Dogscape, with how primitive humans have gotten, do you actually think that we even know what they were looking at? Like, imagine if you went back in time to the days of actual cavemen and just gave them an iPhone. I doubt they ever even get past the password input. Whatever was in there would have been so foreign and advanced that none of them would have a clue how to figure it out. Humanity is truly done for. As for the epilogue, I'm pretty sure the room described with the dead guy and the dog is what was waiting on the other side of that door. And if that was the case, then that message is just completely worthless. All it says is the source is not here. And as we can gather, if the original mind of the first dog is still out there and is the one that controls the hive mind, it is most likely deep within the mass of flesh, bone, and muscle, forever out of reach. The only purpose this military base now serves is as a remnant of a forgotten era. Of a time before the Dogscape. Holy hell, this took a while. Okay, we had some highs and we had some lows, but if you stuck it out to the end here, I seriously cannot thank you enough, especially with how disturbing some of these stories get. I know that not every story was a winner, but the horror that the Dogscape offered had always fascinated me since I first heard of it, and I'm actually happy this video allowed me the opportunity to dive further deep into that horror. The Dogscape provides not just the shock value you get from disturbing, gory imagery, but also the feeling of perpetual hopelessness as there would never be a way to fight or beat it. We either die or live long enough to join it for all eternity. Again, unless we're talking about zombies or aliens, planet-sized threats are kind of rare in horror. So it's always fascinating to see what unique ways people try to break away from those typical tropes, at least for me. And the fact that it was different writers just perpetually adding to the story will always be interesting to me as well. It's like the Dogscape was just an open invitation for aspiring horror writers to practice their skills. I would love to see something like that again gain traction, both as a reader and maybe even as a contributor. That kind of thing, I think, really helps bring the internet horror community together, and I'm glad that at the very least an attempt was made here with the Dogscape. On that note, though, again, thank you so much for watching. This video took a lot longer than my previous videos, and I'm not gonna lie, there were times I even surprised myself with how deep I was into these stories. Theorizing ways how all these different phenomenon add to the hellscape that the world has become. Like, for just a moment, the 12-year-old who first wanted to learn more about Slender Man came back. I legit cannot say it enough. If you got all the way to the end, thank you. This was a lot of fun to make, and if you enjoyed it, please consider liking and sharing the video and subscribing to the channel to see what else I got next. I also got a Patreon now. If you've been enjoying my content and want to directly support me, I'll have it linked below. Right now, general support is the only thing available, but I plan to have more exclusive stuff on there soon. We'll likely cover some other horror stories and creepypastas in the future, so until next time, take care. Hug your dog.